This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Patt and Stephen Chung.
You are watching or listening to the Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. I'm Steve, and that is Doug. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Stephen. How you doing, buddy?
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Nice weekend. Got away for a little while.
Excellent. So this weekend, I know today we're going to talk about doors, but before we do, I actually wanted to ask your advice about a client and a project that I'm working on. And I was thinking that this is very inside baseball. But you know what? This podcast is inside baseball, right? It's for those people that want a little bit more information that we'd find on HGTV or something, right? Mm-hmm. So, okay, I have a client, and let's say that the job is $100,000. Throw a number out there, okay? And really, what's happened is that during this process, the scope is doubled. It's, let's say, $200,000. And I don't think I can really go back and try to get more fee. And I know that what I really should have done was try to work based on a percentage, or somewhere in this process, I should have said, hey, guys, this is really twice the amount of work that what we talked about. Can we revisit the fee? What would your advice in this scenario like this? Like in this project, do I have any recourse, or is this is one of those ones where I got to be a little smarter in the future?
Well, it's a good question. I would say that unless you told the client the fee was going to be a certain number, I would not be concerned about it. Secondly, the architects that I know that have been successful have been relentless with their fees in many cases. So, it is a natural reaction of a client to not want to pay a large amount for services. And the challenge there is, these jobs many times grow in scope, and it's really outside of our control. A lot of people think the architect drives the cost of a job, but many times they really don't, unless the client is willing to kind of let the architect go bananas. The client drives the cost of these jobs up. And so I would say you've really got to stick to your guns in terms of what you told them you were going to be originally giving them in terms of fee. Now, I have not up to this point charged, I shouldn't say I haven't done that yet, but it's not typical for me to charge a percentage on a job simply because I find myself getting involved in small projects and they grow pretty quickly. And so early on, I say, I'm just going to work hourly, and then we'll see where we end up. But those jobs have all grown in scope significantly. I have stayed hourly, but the architects that I have worked with in the past have been percentage based, and I know a lot of architects are percentage based. And I think it makes perfect sense. So to get a percentage of the project, many times interior designers work that way, where they're getting a percentage. And architects that work on high-end residential jobs know that interior designers can make significantly more money than an architect. And that's because they stick with their fee. They work very hard, but they get paid well. So what we do, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, we like to bring the contractor in early in the project. So we say, let's choose a contractor while we're in schematic design or design development. That brings somebody in early, and someday we'll go through how we do that and get the owner comfortable at that early stage. But what that does is it brings somebody in that can evaluate the project as we go along. So what happens is we end up having job meetings where the contractor's involved. We're still early in the game, and he'll say, hey, wait a minute, I saw the project in schematic design here, and I said it's going to be roughly this number. Now that we're in design development, I see it going up by $100, $200, $300,000. The owner needs to be aware of this. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to see the project go out of control, and we want to scale back. That gives them an opportunity to scale way back. Why am I discussing it? I'm discussing it because it's important for the owner to be managed all the way through this process, so that you don't get to a point where you're in construction and now the job's 30% more, and they're wondering why you're sending them bills which account for that overage. So I would say you've got to get contractors involved early in the game in order to stem the tide from some of this uncomfortable stuff that can happen later. So if you are in fact percentage based, I'd send them a bill. But I would also, if you have the opportunity. if you have the opportunity, I'd warm them up a little bit in your job meetings by saying, hey, look, guys, you have increased the scope, and I'm going to be sending some bills relative to that because it's more time on my end. I'm spending more time on this project because it costs more.
Right. Well, Doug, thanks for that. That helps. I mean, with these fees, I'm terrible about it. And as we talked about, we should do a podcast just about fees and this process. I think it's helpful for me, but to hear what your experience has been. But I'm sure for homeowners that don't know really where to begin. I mean, it's unfortunate. The thing is that there's not really one way. So
No.
It's a matter of questions and trying to figure out what both parties are comfortable with. So we'll have to go into that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there are a number of professionals that do our job, not as good a job, but our job out there, and they get paid significantly less money. So they're used to hearing those numbers, and they really don't know where to begin. So I completely agree. We'll do a show about it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is our transition, a terrible transition into doors, because we want to talk about doors. And, I was thinking about doors, and the way I talk about these elements when we get into them, I think about a door as really a transition between two spaces. It's not just a door, but it really is an opportunity to celebrate that transition from one space to another, whether it's from a vestibule into a great room or something. I always think about that threshold or that portal as being a chance to do something very special. Alternately, you can also think about it as something that's very seamless. You go from one space to another. Like a lot of modernists, we like to think like that, where we don't really feel that difference between one space to the next. And I think every house that I work on there's both of those. There are times where I want to celebrate that transition. There are times where I want to make it more seamless. So I guess why don't we pass it to you and let you start with your first tip on doors. Let's see I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the subject.
Well, I always love hearing you even do the intro to these things because, I'm not always thinking about these things, but I like to think them in terms of construction many times. So you give a very scholarly kind of background, thoughtful approach to the door as this transitional element. And I'm thinking about how do you make it, right? How do I tell the contractor, I'd like to do this? Now I've got to explain to this guy or lady, how are you going to make this? I got great advice when I was a real young architect, and that was, Doug, don't ever draw anything unless it can be built. And so I strive to do that all the time. Whenever I design something, I don't just draw it. I draw the detail first. I kind of start with the details so I know how it's built. Then I can actually draw it. So anyway, that as a segue to my first tip, know your wall door construction. So a quick story, when I was a young guy, just out of graduate school in Philadelphia, I went to work for a guy named Wesley Way. And the first thing Wesley said to me when we started talking about construction in this new project was, Doug, do you know how a door fits into a wall? And I said, well, yeah, I know. And he said, no. Do you know how big all the parts of a door are and how they actually fit inside of a wall? And I said, well, actually, no. And so he did this sketch for me. And I think it's really important, even for owners, design your dream home people, anybody that's thinking about how the heck am I going to build something and what is it going to look like? You got to know how a door fits into a wall. So I'm going to put up some images here. But essentially, a door will come pre-hung. That is, it'll come with its jamb and the head, the actual frame around it, or you'll build the frame and put the door in it. But if you look at a door jamb, you've got a door jamb condition in plane. You've got your door, which is 1 3/4 to 2 1/4 inches thick. You've got the door jamb, which is many times, I'd say in typical residential construction, 3/4 of an inch thick. It can be 5/4 if you've got a bigger door and need more rigidity. And then you've got a shim space. And I've seen that shim space drawn anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And contractors like to do it depending on the size of the door and the opening and construction type. It varies. But that shim space helps them to get the door square inside of the opening. That means the door has to open and close. And we want that 1/16 or that 8 inch around the door to be even everywhere. So they use a shim space to square up that door jamb. And then they take a piece of casing, this is in traditional construction, and they add it to the frame of the door, and it covers the shim space, most of the jam condition, and then the drywall. And one last thing I'll say here is the jam condition is relative to the thickness of a wall. So a typical wall in interior construction, residential construction, is 1/2-inch drywall, both sides, and a 2x4 in the center that's made out of wood. Those are 3.5 inches wide. So your wall is 4.5 inches wide. That condition varies in lots of locations, but in simple terms, you've got a 4.5-inch wall, you've got a 4.5-inch jam condition to that door. So you've got a 3/4-inch piece of material, which is 4.5 inches wide, and then it's trimmed out. And that's the way a door fits into a wall, but very basic construction knowledge there, but stuff every architect and anybody that's building a home should know.
Okay, great tip. Okay, so I was thinking about how I organize a sheet, actually a drawing sheet, and the kinds of doors or windows that I'll use. And I'll often think about doors as interior doors, your bathroom doors, your hallway doors, all of these doors, bedroom doors, as one category, sliders, patio doors as a second category, and actually I make a front door as a third category. So I want to talk about the front door, because the front door is really a chance to do something. It's typically a larger door. It often has a side light. It can be could be translucent, let's say, or it could be decorative in some way. The door is typically solid core, so it's a heavier door, and the handle can often be something a bit more expressive. So along those lines, I had a restaurant client, who found, it was a kind of restaurant, was it Tibetan, something like this? He found these carved doors, massive carved doors, and I said, we got to use those doors. And there were double doors, and I don't think you can buy these doors anywhere. He found them in the salvage yard or something. I don't know where he got them from. But basically, we created a frame to receive those doors, because I can't imagine going to buy those doors at a lumber yard or someplace. And I really thought, wow, this is a really fantastic idea. And so we did this doors. They were great. But we made the frame around the doors, and it was not 6 foot or 7 foot. It was like, I don't know, 8'3" or whatever it was. It was some off weird size. But we made the frame to receive those doors. And it really got me thinking in the future that, for the front door, that's really one of the first things that people see. There's a chance to do something. You don't have to be sort of bound by what you can find at your lumber yard with, oh, look at our fancy door with the oval window or whatever. Really, let's let our imaginations be a little bit more, more wide than that, and think that let's find a really expressive, something really, really that we like, that then we'll make a frame. We'll have the builder build a frame. We'll design a frame, a specific custom-made frame for this door to receive this really special decorative door. So my tip is don't be bound by, let's say, convention or what you think you can find in a catalog for the front door. Let that be an opportunity. Think about it almost like artwork, where you can really pick something. We can help to create that frame to make the thing function, to be a active working door. We can find a great handle for that door, and let's really think about that as a custom piece. So that's my first tip. Think about the front door as a chance to really do something expressive.
That's a great dream home tip. I appreciate that a lot. I noticed something as you were talking about the frame in the first tip. I talked about a jam condition. I'm actually talking about that piece of wood, which is also referred to as a frame. So that's typically 3/4 or 5/4 material. Okay, so my second tip has to do with door sizes. So if I were a novice and I was designing my own dream home, one of the first things that I would want to know is how tall is a typical door and how wide is a typical door. And as you and I both know, as you go through a home, doors vary in size. They're not all the same size. And that makes perfect sense. They don't need to be the same size. So know your door sizes is my second tip. So let's first talk about the height of a typical interior door on residential construction. The typical interior door is 80 inches tall, or 6 feet 8 inches tall. I have absolutely no idea where that dimension comes from. Have you ever heard of where 6 feet 8 inches comes from in terms of door slab?
Try to go to 7 feet minimum, but anyway, I don't know where it comes from.
Well, yeah. So when we do a typical residential interior door, will be 6 feet 8 inches tall, because that's what you can buy in any Home Depot store, Lowe's, etc. Right. Now, You can also get them in 7 feet or even in 8 feet. So a lot of the residential stuff that we do, we will have higher ceilings. And so ceilings on a house are usually 8 feet. Sometimes they can be 9 or even 10 feet. In those cases, the doors have to look proportionally in scale with the interior. And so we will go to 7 feet or 8 feet. But if you went to Home Depot and you had to buy a door, it would be 6 feet, 8 inches tall. Now, let's talk a little bit about the widths of doors. So you mentioned exterior doors. The front door is usually 36 inches wide, 3 feet wide. Why is that? Well, it's so you can get furniture into the house. I mean, it's a really, really simple reason. But you don't need to do 3-foot doors throughout the interior of your home. In fact, you'll see 3-foot doors headed down into a basement many times. That's because you've got to get furniture into the basement. If you don't have a door coming from the garage into the basement, you're probably going to want a wider door going down to the basement. But I have seen smaller doors for basement doors. So we've got 36 inches wide for the outside exterior front door. As we move into the house, let's first talk about a powder room or a bathroom. Those doors can be 2'4" to 2'6" inches wide. Well, again, you're not going to need many times to get larger items in there. A master bathroom, you can always turn some of these larger accessories like bathtubs on their side to get them in, but you don't need large doors to go into a bathroom. So many times you'll see 2'4" or 2'6" inches. And then for bedrooms, I'll usually see 2'8", 2'6" to 2'8". And you really don't need much wider than 2'8". I've seen 2'10" before, but you can get a very nice sized bed through a 2'8" wide bedroom door. So those are the basics for doors throughout your house, but just walk through your home and you'll notice that doors come in lots of different sizes, and that's because you don't need larger doors in locations like powder rooms, for example, where you'd rather have more wall space than door space.
Right. No, that's a good point. Actually, if you visit a house and let's say you're trying to buy a house and it makes sense to kind of look at the doors. It's a kind of a telltale sign. If someone's thinking, it's like the doors are sized appropriately. Smaller rooms, smaller doors, bigger rooms, bigger doors. Simple, right? But it's not always that way. Sometimes you get some kind of, dumb guy that says, oh, well, let's make them all 2'6", and you think, hey, they're not thinking here at all. So, anyway, good point.
Absolutely.
Okay, Doug, that was great. Excellent tip. I wanted to talk about pocket doors, and maybe not in the way that you would think. I mean, I think I've used pocket doors for a lot of bathrooms, for example, where you've got a small bedroom and maybe an adjoining bathroom, and you're really worried about the door swing. It's a small bathroom, and somehow you want to get rid of that door swing and say, oh, I'll make a pocket door, and you can buy a kind of prefabricated pocket door at your local supply company. By the way, I've never had a lot of good luck with those. I never found them to be working that well, but nevertheless, they did solve kind of the space issue. This product I'm working on now in Sarasota is interesting because it's unique in the sense that it's a fairly large house. I mean, for 2 people, and actually it's usually one person because the other is often away in business, and it's designed as if there's going to be a family there, but the family really only gets together, twice a year. So really the house wants to be as open as possible, and the idea of just having lots of doors and just open the door and there's a door stop or whatever, it just doesn't seem right. And really the best idea is if you can almost make the wall go away, or let's say a door and a wall were one and the same, you could just kind of slide the wall away. I sort of harken back to my days when I was designing lofts back in the city where, with big open space, you want to have some degree of separation. We would have sort of sliding walls, and we'd sort of do some of that. And as I've sort of transitioned to single family houses, we don't really do that. But in this case, there are a couple of situations where it would seem great, let's say between the living area and actually the master suite. There's no reason when the person's home alone why that can't all be open. And so what we've done is designed, a 5-foot corridor, and basically the door is almost the ceiling height. It's like 9 feet high, and you can just slide that big heavy door into a pocket, and 95% of the time you basically just have it open between the master suite and let's say the living room, and the house just feels so much more open. So I would say on pocket doors, don't be limited again by your imagination that, I can only get a little pocket door, it's only this size because it's prefabricated, but really by finding the right hardware and, if it's a slab, you can really make the door any size you want, and with the proper hardware, you can really create anything. So again, don't be limited by imagination, and based on what your needs are. And in this case, it's very specific, but let's try to make the house open as possible and not really feel like, there's all swinging doors and now the door is just there, in an open position. It's not so nice to look at. Let's just move the entire wall, 5 foot wide, wall basically, push it into a wall, and, there it is, really open. So I would just say, think about pocket doors in a little different way, and you can really achieve some really exciting things in terms of having a space that's very open.
Yep. That's a great tip. Absolutely. One of the neatest details I've seen in some of the homes that Job has done is where that pocket door goes all the way to the ceiling without any head casing at all. It's actually a really difficult detail to pull off because you want to be able to service the hardware on the interior of that pocketing door. And so you've got to, if you're smart, you're going to create some sort of panel that's removable at the ceiling so that you can get in and service that door. Otherwise, they have to rip the drywall off. But it's one of the most beautiful details that we do if we can in fact do that. And you've got to think ahead because the framing in the ceiling has to be running the right way. So you've got to header it off and get ready for all that hardware that's going to be set into that. But not all pocket doors are like that. And pocket doors certainly do create a lot more opporturities throughout the house.
Good tip for me.
Absolutely.
I need to worry about that. Okay, think about that. Okay, anyway, what's your second? It's your second tip, right, or a third tip? Are we in tip
My third
or 2 or
tip.
3? Oh, your third tip. Okay,
third tip. So third tip is know the terms for your door parts. So this drives me bananas. And I've worked with contractors that don't use the proper terms. And I screw these terms up half the time anyway. But there are proper terms or terminology. There is proper terminology for the parts of your door. So if you think about a door in a traditional home, it's got a series of panels in it, right? And so it could be a 3-panel door. These are panels that are set into the door, and they can be all different kinds. They can be flat, hip raised, and they're typically set into the door. They could be 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or even 8 panels. So that door is composed of both what are called stiles and rails, and actually also composed of a mullion or 2. So I like to think about it in terms of a train. So a train has rails on it, and in my mind, they run horizontally. And so on a door, the horizontal parts are called rails. And so if you've got a 6-panel door, and I'll show an image here, you've got a top rail, you've got a crossing rail, you've got a lock rail where the door handle is or the lock is, and you've got a bottom rail. It's the very bottom. So the horizontal parts are called rails. The vertical parts are called stiles. And so the stile happens on the left and it happens on the right. You've got the lock stile where your door handle is, and you've got your hinge stile where the hinge is. And then many times contractors or people that are building these things call the center stile, they call that a mullion. And I think we did a talk at one point about windows. When you put 2 windows together, the center portion is called a mullion. And you have a bottom mullion, a center mullion, and a top mullion. And then, of course, I mentioned this at the beginning, you've got your panels, and those are the parts that are set in on a door. So when we're building houses, many times we have to describe to the contractor what part of the door we're discussing. And so the biggest terms to remember are the rails, which run horizontally, and the stiles, which run vertically. And I also talk about like windows in that case as well. I talk about the rail at the top of the window and the stiles on the sides of the windows, but it's more typically used to describe a door.
And it's so funny because, I think probably listeners are thinking that all architects know every single every single part of the door is named. And of course, I'm one of those that don't. I say, door, the opening part, I just don't know all the terminology of windows and doors. And it's funny to hear you explain it. And I think,
well, I've been around
all of us know that
so
stuff.
Long, it's, and especially in traditional construction, you refer to these things all the time.
That's right.
So anyway,
maybe it's as a modernist, probably, I think modernists don't know all the terms that, let's say, someone who's working in more traditional work, they just know all what every different part of a door or window door, a muntin, or they know all these things. And muntin, what's that? I just have a big piece of glass. I don't have any muntins. So, alrighty. My third tip is I don't know if it's a tip exactly, but often people ask about barn doors, and I'm being asked to put them in this house that I'm doing right now, and I'm trying to discourage them from this because I've had problem with hardware. Now, barn doors are doors that you see, like a barn, but basically the door is exposed, the hardware is exposed, and it sort of slides in front of an opening. Different reasons why I don't like a barn door besides just the problems I have with the hardware. Let's say that I got really good hardware. Is the door is never really sealed. It slides across the opening, but it is off the door. You don't really have it's not a soundproof barrier. It's not a light-proof barrier. It really is, in my mind, it's more of an aesthetic thing. I think people like the aesthetic of this, I don't know, whatever door and the hardware. They like seeing the hardware. There's something nice about seeing all that stuff. And typically in the work that I do, it's more contemporary. I don't want to see all that. I kind of want it to go away, which is why we talk about the pocket doors. But my main issue really has to do with kind of the exposed hardware. These things are all out in the open and the dust, and I just have always have issues. And I will tell you an example from this hotel that I'm working on, talking with the hotel management company this is for Starwood. I think it's the Westons. And they often use these doors, because it's over bathrooms. They like the idea that the guest is there, they can slide the door open, and the bathroom can be kind of open to the living or the bedroom all the time, especially if there's only one person. But they have problems. They always have problems because it's a guest. It's like driving a rental car. You don't really take care of it, right? Just like you slam the door open, and they say it falls apart all the time. They have all kind of issues with it, and so they really they were sort of discouraging me and another hotel project from using these. And I said, don't worry, I'm not into them anyway. So I would just say that, if you want that barn door, you're really gonna have to spend on the hardware. Don't try to find the most inexpensive hardware that you can find. Typically you're talking about, it's got to be substantial to hold this door, and people are going to be kind of sliding it this way and that way, and it's not like typically, it's a big heavy door, so you really need substantial hardware. And now you really have to think about the hardware and the aesthetic of the hardware. Does that aesthetic work with the rest of the house? And of course the door itself and the handle, you can work with those things. But for me, it really comes back to the hardware. And also, again, the function. Do you need this to be sort of soundproof? Do you need this privacy? Because the barn door is not going to solve those issues. So I don't know. I just have not found it to be in most houses something that I'm interested in using. So anyway, what's your thought about the barn door?
Well, I'm seeing more and more that clients want barn doors. We're doing barn doors to a bathroom between two kids' bathrooms. Two kids' bedrooms. We've got a bathroom in the center. It's got doors on either side, and they want to do barn doors. And, we talked to the client and we said, look, it's not going to provide any privacy for the boys. And she's like, oh, they're boys. It's fine. I'm just thinking, I don't know. Interesting. You had pointed out the hotel model. We stayed at a hotel where the door to the bathroom was a glass barn door, and there was absolutely no privacy whatsoever. So we've got our kids and my wife, we're all in the same room, and there's no privacy whatsoever in this bathroom. It was just goofy. It looked beautiful, but it didn't really work. So you're right, barn doors are a challenge. They're great for the basement, for like a workout space or something, but I don't know, man. Yeah, I'm not sold.
Exactly, me too. Yeah. All right, so this is we do have a question this week, Doug, which is great.
Sweet.
So last week we didn't have a question, so
bring it on.
Dear Doug and Steve, what is your opinion on using overhead garage doors for living space?
Well, I don't know. Are you asking me?
I'm asking you. Someone's asking you. So what do you think about using a garage door for?
Well, I love garage doors for industrial, commercial spaces, right? Those are awesome because they can be lifted up. You got a bar in the front and everything's open air, and that's awesome. And I've also seen not like tiny houses, but people are moving toward really small living spaces where it's like one gigantic room, a giant rectangle kind of thing. And then at the end of that is a giant garage door with glass in it. And so it provides light. You can open it up in the summer. I like that a lot, but I'm not so sure on the interior, if that's what they're asking, is such a great idea, because there's a ton of clunky hardware that goes with overhead garage doors. They're loud, and you're looking at this galvanized crap in your home. So I'm not so sure. I'm sure it can be done well, and if you have the right hardware for the door, but I'm not sold unless it's done, in your terms, like in a very modern way where everything is concealed and this door kind of comes down and then goes away and you don't even know it was there to begin with.
I guess it has to do with really budget, right? Someone thinks, oh, I've got a big space. Maybe it's an art studio, something like that, because you don't have any insulation. I mean, very little insulation. The seals are not very, you have, as you say, all the hardware, there's a lot of noise when it comes up and down. You have certainly no insect protection. I think you don't have really even rodent protection because you just don't have those seals that you would have with a real window. So I guess for a very limited application for the right climate, maybe it seems kind of neat. I mean, I think, again, an art studio somewhere or a garage would make sense, but I can't see where I would recommend this for one of my clients. I mean, they'd be coming back to me very quickly and, Doug, I don't like that idea. Why did you do that? Why did you recommend this?
I'd ask the client for an image. If this is what you're thinking, let me see what you're really thinking. Let's talk about the details.
Right, got it. Okay, awesome. Well, there you have it. That's doors. Any final comments, Doug, on the subject of doors?
Oh, we could go on and on. I mean, there's just so many things to talk about. I got into the details of doors today, but there are a lot of really neat applications for doors that we'll cover at another time, I think. So anyway, so you've been watching or listening to the Design Your Dream Home show with Doug and Steve. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.